Few World War II battles have captivated historians and enthusiasts more than the Battle of Kursk, that took place in July 1943. This pivotal clash between the Germans and the Soviets is commonly referred to as the greatest tank battle in history, and is described as irreversibly shattering German Panzer forces. Some regard Kursk as the turning point of the war on the Eastern Front. On July 12, 1943, on the southern front of Kursk Bulge near Prokhorovka station, took place one of the largest battles in military history with participation of armored units. The Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army and the German 2nd SS Panzer Corps clashed in a massive battle of armored vehicles, reminiscent of medieval clashes between opposing armored cavalry. Up to 1,200 tanks and self-propelled artillery units were involved from both sides. The 5th Guards Tank Army suffered heavy losses in the attack, but it was able to prevent the Wehrmacht from capturing Prokhorovka and breaching the third and most heavily fortified defensive belt. The German plan had been for the 48th Panzer Corps to lead the attack against the Soviet defenses at Prokhorovka, but it was the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, commanded by General Paul Hauser, that made the most progress and was subject to a major assault from the 5th Guards Tank Army on July 12. This video is sponsored by World of Tanks. World of Tanks is free to play with over 100 million players worldwide, and for PC. World of Tanks has more than 600 tanks, destroyers, artillery, light, medium, and heavy tanks. There is always a new way to play. You can drive your tanks across open fields and deserts, climb steep hills, sneak through forests, and play your matches in urban or industrial zones. There are over 40 arenas. The best part of the game is it is historically accurate. Models and vehicles have characteristics that make you feel like you are inside a real tank. You have the full ability to gain experience, modify and upgrade your tanks, creating a steel beast ready for any challenge. Download World of Tanks using the first link in the description. During the registration, use the code TANKMANIA to get for free 7 days premium account, 250,000 credits, the premium tank Excelsior, and 3 rental tanks for 10 battles each. Check out World of Tanks merch on Amazon. The store link is in the description. The German forces involved in the Battle of Prokhorovka were from the 3 Waffen-SS divisions of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf. The Southern Pincers 3rd Panzer Corps and 2nd SS Panzer Corps arrived in the Prokhorovka area on July 11th. The 3 SS Panzer divisions moved from southwest to northeast. The Totenkopf division was stationed on the left flank. The Leibstandarte was in the center, and the Das Reich division was on the right flank, heading straight for the Soviet 2nd Tank Corps. The tanks would meet the next morning, in an area 500 meters wide and 1,000 meters deep. The tank battle lasted 3 hours, and after the battle, more than 100 Soviet tanks were burning on the battlefield. One of the soldiers who played a critical role in this victory was SS First Lieutenant Rudolph von Ribbentrop. This would be Rudolph's most successful day of the war. As the name suggests, he was the son of the German diplomat and foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop. Rudolph von Ribbentrop had slept soundly on the night of July 11, 1943, exhausted after 7 days on the attack. The morning of the 12th of July, he was summoned to the battalion commander's commanding vehicle. Von Ribbentrop stated in his account of the day, the battalion commander's tone suggested that it was not surprising that the offensive, which had evolved into one massive tank battle, would continue to produce tank engagements. My 6th Company had suffered significant losses thus far. Only 7 of the 22 tanks we began with on July 5th were still operational on the evening of July 11th. Fortunately, not all of these had been total losses, and the company was receiving a steady stream of repaired Panzer IVs. We had fought our way across a Russian anti-tank ditch the day before. Our battalion's other 2 companies were stationed there at the time, and we were in the rear as the reserve company. The anti-tank ditch, which ran across the front, had only one crossing. The road to Prokhorovka ran over it. The bridge there had not yet been destroyed or already rebuilt. The anti-tank ditch was located in a valley. A 400-meter wide slope extended in the direction of Prokhorovka from there. The road to Prokhorovka ran along the right side of the slope, and it was followed by an overgrown railway embankment that could be considered tank-proof. The front bent back behind the anti-tank ditch at the embankment, then ran east to the border with our neighbors, the 2nd SS Panzer Division. A battalion of our Panzer Grenadier had occupied the embankment, while a 2nd battalion had gone into position at right angles, up above on the previously mentioned slope. There was so much equipment scattered across the slope that it appeared to be dotted with vehicles and weapons of every kind, which was out of sight of the Russians. Von Ribbentrop turned casually toward the front, while sipping the hot coffee that had been handed to him. The scene in front of him made him believe he was hallucinating. Smoke rounds created a purple wall of smoke in the air. It meant enemy armor. "Crank 'em up," von Ribbentrop shouted, dropping his cup. "Follow me." Then he told his executive officer Malchow, "We're going to move in a line up the slope. You and your platoon are on the left, while the other 3 tanks and I are in the middle and on the right. Bend the left flank slightly back in case we are outflanked." With that, the company set itself in motion and deployed on the slope as if it were an exercise field. It was deployed with a precision that it made my 22-year-old heart beat faster. Leading these young but experienced soldiers into battle was a particularly uplifting experience for me. I radioed my company to take up position on the slope ahead of us and take up the fight from there. As we moved down the forward slope, we noticed the first T-34s in the small valley to our left. They appeared to be trying to outflank us from the left. We came to a halt on the slope and opened fire, striking several of the enemy. Several Russian tanks were set on fire. For a good gunner, 800 meters was the ideal range. I looked all around as I normally would, as we waited to see if more enemy tanks would show up. What I witnessed left me speechless. From beyond the shallow rise about 150 to 200 meters in front of me, 15, then 30, then 40 tanks appeared. There were eventually too many to count. The T-34s were racing toward us, carrying mounted infantry. "It's all over now," I said to myself at that moment. My driver thought I said, "Get out," and started opening his hatch. I grabbed him firmly and dragged him back into the tank. Meanwhile, my foot had poked the gunner in the right side. This was the cue for him to turn right. The first round was soon on its way, and the T-34 began to burn as a result of its impact. It was only about 50 to 70 meters away. At the same time, the tank next to me took a direct hit and burst into flames. SS Sergeant Papke leapt clear, but that was the last we saw of him. His neighbor to the right was also hit, and it quickly went up in flames. The avalanche of enemy tanks rolled straight towards us. Tank after tank, wave after wave, it was a simply unimaginable assembly, and it was moving at very high speed. No time was left for us to assume defensive positions. We had no choice but to fire. Every round was a hit from this range, but when would a direct hit put an end to it for us? Somewhere in my subconscious, I realized there was no way out. All we could do in such hopeless situations was take care of what was at hand. So we knocked out a third, then a fourth T-34 from less than 30 meters away. The Panzer IV we were using had about 18 to 20 rounds of high explosive ammunition, within immediate reach of the loader. The rest were armor-piercing. My loader soon exclaimed, "No AP left." All of our immediately available armor-piercing ammunition had been expended. The gunner, radio operator, and driver had to pass more ammunition to the loader. Being stationary at this point made it more likely that the Russian tanks would detect you and destroy you. Our only hope was to get back behind the slope, even though the Russians had already crossed it. Our chances of escaping there were better than in our current exposed position. We turned in the midst of a swarm of Russian tanks, rolled back about 50 meters, and arrived at the reverse slope of the first rise. We turned to face the enemy again, this time with slightly better cover. Just then, a T-34 halted about 30 meters off to our right, and started to engage with us. Soon after, my gunner scored a direct hit on the Russian's turret. The T-34 exploded, and its turret flew 3 meters through the air, nearly striking with my tank's gun. Other T-34s with mounted infantry were passing us while all of this was going on. We only had one slim chance. We had to keep moving at all times. Because all Russian tanks were moving at high speeds across the terrain, a stationary tank would be immediately identified as an enemy and attacked. We then faced the increased threat of being destroyed by one of our own tanks, which were stationed below in a wide line at the anti-tank ditch by the railway embankment. They'd started shooting at the approaching enemy tanks. On the smoke and dust shrouded battlefield, looking into the sun, it would be impossible for our crews to distinguish us from a Russian tank. I repeatedly broadcast our code name. All stations. This is Kunibert. We are in the middle of the Russian tanks. Don't shoot at us. I got no response. Meanwhile, the Russians had set fire to several vehicles as they passed through Piper's battalion and our artillery battalion. But by that time, the fire from our two remaining tank companies were starting to have an impact. The artillery's self-propelled gun battalion and Piper's Panzer Grenadier, the latter with close-range weapons, were also wreaking havoc on the Russian tanks and pinning down the Russian infantry, which had jumped from the T-34s and was attempting to advance on foot. The entire battlefield was shrouded in smoke and dust. Fresh groups of Russian tanks continued to emerge from this inferno, and our tanks knocked them out on the broad slope. It was an indescribable jumble of wrecked tanks and vehicles. This undoubtedly contributed to our salvation, in that the Russians did not recognize us. In the meantime, the rest of the crew, driver, radio operator, and gunner, searched the tank for more armor-piercing rounds. As soon as we found one, we took out another of the T-34s that had overtaken us when we came to a halt. It was incredible that we hadn't been fired upon yet. All experts agree that this was due to the fact that none of the Russian tanks had dedicated commanders at the time. The gunner was still in command of the tank, and he could only see in the direction his cannon was pointing. Had it been otherwise, we would not have survived. The Russians turned left in order to reach the road and cross the bridge over the anti-tank ditch. However, an unbelievable scene was played out there. Our tanks and anti-tank guns fired at the oncoming enemy from the repaired bridge over the anti-tank ditch. I had managed to take cover behind a knocked-down T-34. We then joined the battle against the enemy tanks from there. They were rushing towards the bridge from every direction. This made finding our targets easier for our battalion and us. burning T-34s ran into and over one another. It was a total inferno of fire and smoke, and impacting shells and explosions. After exhausting all AP ammunition and being hit by enemy fire, which disabled his tank and injured his gunner, von Ribbentrop was able to obtain a repaired Panzer IV, and rejoin the battle fully armed. We rolled across the bridge in our new tank. The force of the Russian attack had been broken in the meantime. The field was strewn with T-34s, all of them burning. My company's losses were astonishingly low. The only 2 total losses I witnessed were at the beginning of the attack. The other 2 companies had suffered no total losses. The Artillery Battalion and Piper's Battalion likewise escaped with minimal losses. According to prisoner statements, the enemy had a 3rd wave of tanks ready, but it was not committed. There were over 100 knocked-out Russian tanks within our main line of defense. Von Ribbentrop and his crew had destroyed 14 of them. The commanding general, Hauser, arrived at the battleground that afternoon to see for himself if the reports of this stunning victory were true. Later, it was reported that he had marked the destroyed tanks with a piece of chalk and counted them in disbelief. The Russian attack had been carried out with great force and incredible stubbornness. Clearly, the Russian command intended to crush the threat posed by our forces with brute force. This numerically superior enemy should have been able to drive back and possibly destroy Piper's battle group with better leadership and by exploiting the element of surprise. The courageous fighting grenadier had held their nerve in the face of an oncoming swarm of enemy tanks, stopping and wiping out the advancing enemy infantry. This great defensive success did nothing to change the fact that the tank battle at Prokhorovka, which had seen both sides suffer heavy losses, had ended Operation Citadel. After failing to achieve his objective, Hitler cancelled Operation Citadel and began redeploying his forces to deal with new pressing developments elsewhere, against the advice of his commanders. At the end of the battle, Soviet General Rotmistrov, known as the Lion of Prokhorovka, stated, "In light of the situation and the heavy losses, our troops cannot actively carry out any further combat operations." Rudolph von Ribbentrop was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross on July 20, 1943. He said at the time, "Every man in my tank has earned this decoration. I wear it for my crew." Rudolph von Ribbentrop was transferred on August 1, 1943, to take part in the formation of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend. Thanks again to World of Tanks for sponsoring this video. Download World of Tanks using the link in the description.